What's up, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast. I'm Scott Bair alongside Terrin, Waack, and Tori McElhaney, coming to you shortly after the conclusion of a losing streak snapping 24-15 victory over the rival New Orleans Saints in front of a packed house, a spirited house as well. This was, okay, must win is overused, but absolutely 110,000% have to have it game. And the Falcons went out and got it. By virtue of tiebreakers that don't really count till the end of the season, we will say that the Falcons are in first place in the NFC South. They have an unblemished 3-0 record in the division, and what Arthur Smith said during the bye and coming out of it was everything is there in front of them, and it sure is. They are heading towards the month of December with prime position to win their first NFC South crown since 2016 and their first playoff appearance since 2017. All those things are positives. We are going to break down everything that happened, went well, did not go so well over the course of this game, and try to figure out how the Falcons can somehow, in my opinion, at least get to 9-8, which might win this division. Overall general thoughts, comments on this game that Falcons just had to have.
It feels like the last time they won was very long ago.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help with the bye. Like, it's been a month.
Yeah.
When you put that in perspective. Arthur said himself, like, they needed this. Mm-hmm. And I think they did, especially after the bye and going back to Desmond Ridder as their starting quarterback, that there are multiple reasons that this was so important. Probably both for, like, confidence, but also their standing. Because, yeah, there are the logistics that now they are atop the conference. But for themselves more than anything, and that's what the word cathartic was used multiple times by Arthur Smith about this win, and I thought that was just such a well-used word, and I just hadn't heard it in this kind of context before, but yeah, it was probably cathartic. Like, instead of a sigh of relief, it was like, we deserved it, we earned it, and we needed it.
Yeah, I was talking to Caden Ellis in the locker room after the game, and obviously this game meant a lot to him and David Onyemata and Ryan Nielsen because the Saints are their former team, and Terrin's former team.
And Terrin's former team, that's true.
Right, yes.
I covered that.
So I was having this conversation with him, and something that Arthur Smith had said in his postgame interview was that the Falcons came and had some really good practices coming out of the bye week and going into week 12's prep. And so I asked Caden about it. I was like, why did this week feel different? And he said, he was like, everybody coming off of the bye has a little bit more juice. You're a little bit healthier, but really we were hungry. When we beat Tampa at Tampa, we expected to go on a run, and then we lose 3 straight, and we don't feel like we should have lost any of them. No. Losing those games and to fall the way that we did, that bites, that stings. There was some tough self-reflection, some tough coaching, but it was what we needed, and we came out Wednesday fired up and ready to go. And Jessie Bates kind of expounded upon this in the locker room too, where he said, I think if you go back and you watch the film of this game, you see how much we wanted it.
I agree there. I mean, it just looked like they were enjoying it too. You had a smile on Desmond Ridder's face. You had a smile on Jessie Bates' face. Like, they were enjoying their success. Like, yes, there were errors. I mean, there were 2 interceptions from Ridder in his return, but at the end of the day, it didn't ruin anything.
This was the first time, I think, this season that I felt that the Falcons had momentum and they kept it for a significant period of time. I don't think I have felt that in, I'll say, almost any game to this point, the way that I felt it on Sunday.
I felt like we were watching in a mirrored world because the Saints just kept kicking field goals, and for the longest time we were talking about how the Falcons only kicked field goals. Yeah. So I was like, whoa, deja vu, but on the other side.
Right, which we will get into later.
Yes.
It was. I want to go back to the Ellis quote there. And now I'm paraphrasing, but that they expected to go on a run, and they felt like they should have won. He said all 3 games. So we're talking Titans, Vikings, and Cardinals.
And I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a fair assessment. And when you come out of that, the state of mind, when you expect to go on a run and instead you go on a losing skid, the opposite, I think some of the words that are being used after this game, cathartic, great one. And the words that we heard in Arizona were frustration. And I think that the reason why frustration is used a lot right? But I think that is also accurate because if they expected to go on a run and they feel like they are way better than 4-6 and are still 4-6 and have the defense has lost them some games late, that I think that those two words kind of go hand in hand. And
I think it was nice, too, that Caden Ellis said this.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just us on the outside looking in saying, okay,
They should have won.
They should have won these games. On paper, these teams are better. They, in the locker room, felt like these are games we should have won and didn't, and that's why we're mad.
Yeah, and it's kind of a WTF, bro, sort of a situation that I think ultimately
Yes, Scott. WTF, bro.
WTF, bro. Ultimately, I think that the motivation to come out of it with such passion, you could see. Let's stay on the Caden Ellis thing. I know he's playing his former team, but he showed as much emotion out of that linebacker spot with every play that he made. He was physical. They were hitting. Mm-hmm. I often say that the rivalry games play out for the NFL, not college, but in the NFL they play out in the stands more than they do on the field. And whether the Falcons players hate the Saints or not, it was a level of physicality, a level of passion and emotion. You go back to Cordero Patterson gets a first down, and he is like, he's just raw emotion at that point. There's a scuffle with Jonnu Smith, and Chris Lindstrom literally laid somebody out. That was another one of the go back and watch that tape.
Yeah, watch
after
Chris
the
on
pick.
that. Yeah.
Chris Lindstrom, and I don't think he needs to do it, but he absolutely pulverized somebody.
Yeah.
Another interesting point, and then we'll get back on script here. Something that Desmond Ridder said a couple of different times. He said that the offensive line is their foundation, and the offensive line was challenged to be the offensive line we know they can be. Challenged to a bunch of highly paid dudes and prideful dudes to say, hey, go out there and assert yourself. And now they didn't end with the ball in their hands on that long drive, but they ran the ball 9 straight times. The offensive line asserted itself. I think that we saw that time and time again. Somebody who definitely made his presence felt both in subtle and very overt dramatic fashion is Jessie Bates. The dude came through huge. The pick 6, 92 yards, and a very smart play where he punched the ball out. And I think that one turned into points too.
Mm-hmm. It did.
Yep, to start the fourth quarter, they scored, which that was something that I talked to Jessie about in the locker room too, where I kind of said, this has been your turnovers aside. Let's just look at the fact that 14 points were scored off of those turnovers. Obviously, pick 6 for Jessie, but then the Falcons get the ball back on their own 5-yard line after he punches the ball out inside Atlanta territory. And for me, that was something that we've been missing, a series of events where the Falcons defense gets a turnover and the offense goes and scores. That's not something that we've seen a lot of throughout this year, and it's actually been a problem for this offense. A lot of guys have talked about this, and I asked Jessie about it, and he was like, yeah, that's something that we've struggled to do. We've struggled to piece drives and piece momentum together as a team. For us to do that, to get a turnover and then go down and score and make it a 2-possession game, that's what we're talking about that we got to do. We have to separate from people when we get the opportunity, and we did that today. And that's so right. And the fact that Jessie Bates was the one to do it. Talking to guys like Calais Campbell, Caden Ellis, AJ Terrell, all these guys had such praise for Jessie Bates, who now that Grady Jarrett is no longer available to the Falcons with a season-ending knee injury, you need someone to continue to step up to that absolute leadership role. He is the leader of this defense, and I think Jessie Bates has been that. And honestly, it just kind of continues now that Grady's not on the field. And everybody was talking about, when we need someone to make a play, Jessie goes and makes a play. We're saying let's get a fumble, let's get a turnover. Jessie Bates goes out and does it. Calais said, this is a guy I wanted to play with because I had seen him and faced him in the last few years and been really thrilled with what I've been able to see from him, and to be able to be on the same team as him is something that I wanted for myself. AJ Terrell's like, this is the reason we went out and got him, to be a difference maker. He's being a difference maker day in and day out. And I think that all can't be overlooked in the scope of what this one player has meant to this organization even halfway through, or I guess like now over halfway through the season.
Well, that alone speaks volumes because he's in his first year here.
Right.
He's already being considered such a leader of this team. And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, he's still relatively new here. Mm-hmm. He's a veteran in the league, but still new to the Falcons organization as a whole. But yet what week is it? Week 12.
Week 12,
and
yeah.
he's already matched his single season career high in interceptions. And it's not like he's new to the league whatsoever. Like, there are years and years and years of experience that to match it already with a new team just says enough about him and why he's paid how much he's paid.
Right, and that's a good point too. And to your first point about like, okay, he's new here, I think that was a major question that I had coming into this season. It's like the Falcons had almost a complete overhaul of their defense. There are a lot of guys on this defense who this is their first year here. Who was going to step up? Obviously, it's still Grady's group, and that was something that everybody talked about up until the point that Grady Jarrett gets hurt. And I guarantee you, when Grady Jarrett comes back, it's just like, okay, here you go. You're still the top dog for us. But Jessie Bates has done something, I think, really special in how much, too. I love watching, this is a random aside, but I love watching the mic'd ups of the guys in the secondary and how much they're talking to Jessie Bates. My favorite one was D. Alford in Tampa Bay, where there's a clip and it's
Jessie,
like 30
Jessie.
seconds. It's like, hey, Jessie, hey, Jessie, hey, Jessie, hey, Jessie. Like, that stuff matters. When you have someone who the entire secondary, the entire defensive unit, perhaps the entire team gravitates towards as a leader. And I think Jessie handles it very, very well.
And it's to see that individual move into that role. Look, Grady Jarrett is irreplaceable. But I think that there was a bit of a kind of shocking nature to him not being around. And you hear so much about his natural leadership and his on-field production and all of these things. And I think it was encouraging from a motivational standpoint. We talked about this feeling like the Falcons really wanted this one. And to see a guy like that, look, he's not going to be Grady Jarrett, but to step up and lead with production and also with his voice and just his presence, that's what this team needs. And it's weird because when you think about who are you going to pay in free agency or how in roster construction, right? Then when they went out and paid a safety. That's not typically what you do. You typically play edge rushers or defensive tackles, cornerbacks, things like that. But they went out and they invested in this safety and they spent a lot of money to do it. And I think ultimately it's definitely paying off for them. Another thing that paid off for them and could pay off for you guys is that Arnold McElhaney got a sack.
That was a hard.
See, now here's where I thought you were going with that. I thought you were going into Bijan and being like, fantasy owners of Bijan Robinson had a great day, but you went straight to the ad. So.
Both looked up like, where are you going with this?
Where are you going with this? I'm just like, but
good job, Scott.
Maybe it's because I was
going.
I think it's because my mind drifted to chicken tenders.
Okay.
And I think that's naturally where it went. I haven't eaten in a while. So this podcast, as you all know, is being brought to you by Zaxby's. And we've got some good news, as I mentioned, since the Falcons sacked an opposing quarterback at home. It was Arnold McElhaney on a huge third down. That you can go to any Atlanta area Zaxby's for a buy one, get one Big Zax snack meal the day after the game. So on Monday, for those of you listening now, use the code ATLSAC23. Now, how am I going to transition to Bijan Robinson? I probably won't do it successfully, so let's just...
You know who else loves chicken tenders?
I should ask him that.
I bet he does.
I mean, who doesn't?
Me.
Even
oh, that's right.
But I don't eat meat.
Yeah. But Bijan Robinson and this Falcons running game, let's just...
They popped off.
Let's just drop some.
A season high,
Finally.
228 rushing yards. They averaged 5.6 yards per carry. Yeah, that's about it.
On 41 carries. 41 carries. And they did one of those Arthur Smith run the piss out of the ball moments at the end of the game. 9 consecutive runs. 9 consecutive runs.
And let's talk about this, the fact that Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Cordarrelle Patterson were all involved in a very, very big way in this run game.
Three-headed monster.
This is when the Falcons' run game is at its best, when you are actually using all three of those guys in, different ways, in the same way, but you're using them. And I think that it was so encouraging to see, because we have not seen those three be used the way that they were used against the Saints at any point in time before this. And I know a lot of that is circumstance driven, because, Cordarrelle Patterson wasn't at 100% early in the season. Bijan Robinson had an illness against Tampa Bay, so that, messes up his usages there, or limits them, not messes them up, but limits them. So you haven't really seen what we saw today. And to see what we were able to see today, where this group as a whole, with Desmond Ridder picking up some yards on some scrambles too, averages 5.6 yards per carry. That's a big number. I know Bijan Robinson alone, if you just look at his stats, he averaged 5.7 yards per carry. I mean, he also in the pass game had, if you include his pass game and what he did in the run game, had 123 total yards from scrimmage. I mean, this is why you go out and get someone like Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, and this is the type of production that he can have. I think, going back, I wrote a Falcons Daily on Bijan during the week, so kind of dove into some numbers, but also into what he was saying after the Cardinals game. Obviously, his usage has been a major talking point. I think that's a nice way to say it.
That's a nice way to put it.
Talking point over the course of the year, especially around midseason, as the lights in our quote-unquote studio are going out. But now it's,
Keep going. We're talking about Bijan.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Bijan.
I got distracted. Anyway, with Bijan, even he said after the Cardinals game that it's the second half of the season. They've got to start winning games, kind of like gloves are off. And I think that the workload that they got from him was solid and productive, and still found times to get him some rest, and the guys who stepped in for him were productive. Tyler Algier wasn't used much at all in the first half.
Right.
And then as the offensive line starts wearing the opposing defense down, that's when Tyler is really impactful. And I know that we've said this before, but CP runs hard every time.
Terrifying.
I love watching CP run. I really do, and I've missed seeing it. But this was a guy that was running like he was angry at the world. He was running like his hair was on fire. I mean, he was...
Marcus May just bounced right off of him.
So physical. He was so physical. And I think, honestly, one of my favorite quotes from the entire night was, and it comes from Arthur Smith. So it was interesting. So Arthur Smith said that essentially the goal for the second half was to take the game over, especially at the line of scrimmage. And they did that. And he made the comment, he was like, what we did in the fourth quarter, that's who we need to be to close out games. That's who they haven't really been this season. Again, it goes back to the whole idea of momentum and keeping momentum. And what they were able to do in the run game, it helped establish that they were keeping the momentum and that they were keeping the game and they were taking control of the game by, we're just going to run the ball down your throats and we're going to use these big physical backs to do that.
It probably was a confidence boost, too, considering the Saints defense, especially that defensive line, is known to be able to stop the run.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at it, they were running at almost 2-1 over pass attempts. And I understand the need and desire for balance. It makes sense. I don't think that the 23 Falcons will turn into the 22 Falcons. But I think maybe the winning formula here is a dominant line with a run game. Look, they're not always going to run like this, right? But to get that steady on-schedule production and then get enough from Desmond Ridder to work the ball down the field. But the thing is, right, is that 13 for 21 for 168, not wonderful, right? Not efficient enough, in my opinion. But I can deal with inefficiency more than I can deal with the critical mistakes, because that's just a thing that exists, and it's whether you can overcome them or not. Today, they were able to do that. They scored off of turnovers. They didn't allow points coming off of turnovers. All those things are positive. I just think in the grand scheme of it, if you're going to go, I don't know how many games we have left, 4-2 down the stretch, to end up at 9-8 and be in position to win this division, you need more consistency from the quarterback spot. Now, you can say more consistency everywhere, but I think that we saw a great example of an offensive line doing its job, a defense doing its job, especially in critical moments, all I can think about, and is Dean Pease just playing over and over in my head.
Yeah.
Yards don't matter, points do. And they were good there. And I think that Desmond Ridder was good at times. He needs to be good or gooder. He needs to be better and more efficient with his responsibilities. And my guess is that he would take a look at the stat sheet and probably say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Desmond is very aware, I feel like, of errors he's made and ways he can improve, especially, I think, getting swapped out there for a hot second probably made him step back and look at it from a completely different perspective, which you addressed in your column, where it's like he needed to evaluate his play from an outside view and really figure out how to be the starting quarterback, how to earn that role and keep that role, because now it's his again.
And I think there were some moments where his decisions to run were pretty good. Now, he said that New Orleans has proven vulnerable to play extending quarterbacks,
Yes.
and that he would go one read, two read, and the third option was his legs. So he was getting to the run quicker. I thought he was impactful in that regard, and those are positives. But to see, every turnover is different, right? Is a snowflake. But I still think that having multiple critical mistakes in this game with interceptions is something that he's got to avoid. He has to manage those situations better. If it means throwing it away, which we saw a couple of different times and noted, hey,
growth.
He's not aggressive, that's signs of growth. If he can get a little bit better I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but on the interception to Bijan Robinson near the end of the first half, Bijan says that he's got to make that route a little crisper. There was a miscommunication there, but Dez was adamant at saying, I threw it 6 inches in front of him and a little high. If I put that on his numbers, that's a completion. So I think it's also good that we're seeing accountability across the board. Now, kind of final thing. I keep saying Falcons have to go 4-2 down the stretch to win out. I don't know if you all agree with that or not, but what are some things that we saw that give you that creates optimism that 4-2 is possible? And are there issues that make you think 4-2 might be pretty difficult, considering that the Jets, the Saints again, Bucks, Colts, and Panthers
And Bears.
So for me, I think, and this is something that Scott and I were talking about before we started recording, but
Left me out of that convo.
you were editing. So what we were talking about was that when you look at this Atlanta Falcons team, they're still the same team that they were before the bye week. They still have a problem with turnovers as an offense. They still have a problem on defense with giving up explosive plays. That hasn't changed. What changed today or Sunday, whenever you're listening to this, was that those things didn't ultimately mean that they were going to lose the game.
Right.
But in moments during this entire season, those things have accumulated to the point where they have lost those games. So is this who I personally think this is who the Falcons are. They need to play better in the moment. If they're going to give up explosive plays and they're going to turn the ball over, if that's who they are, then you have to be almost perfect in every other area in order to give yourself a chance. And if you can clean up those things, then great. But so far, we haven't seen them do that. And yes, that's me being critical after a really good win. They really needed this win. They looked good in moments. I thought this defense looked really good in the red zone. I thought this offense putting up, 2 touchdowns with Bijan Robinson was good. Running the ball, fantastic. But in reality, when you have this amount of games left and you need to win these games, particularly their games, they have 3 games against all 3 NFC South teams to close out the season, and you need those wins if you want to be atop the NFC South. If you're going to continue to turn the ball over and you're going to continue to give up explosive plays, then there has to be a counter to that.
Right.
And there was a counter to that today. The Falcons defensively were really, really good in the red zone. The Falcons offensively ran the ball really dang well. So can you counteract the bad with the good?
Right.
And when you are, you like we saw on Sunday, you're able to win. But if you're not, you see games like Detroit, games like Jacksonville, Washington, Titans. I mean, there are examples of both happening. So make sure that again, the good outweighs the bad because a game can't be perfect.
See, when I look at this team and compare it to the one from before the bye, the biggest thing that stands out to me is the fact that they made it into the end zone. They didn't settle for field goals. Like, this is only the third time this season they've scored 3 touchdowns.
Wow.
Yeah, but I'll say this too. But they only scored 24 points today.
It's still lower,
and one of them was a pick 6. So from an offensive standpoint, like, I want more.
And I think that more is going to be required. But I think all three of us have discussed this. We always kind of joke that poor Terrin is like frantically writing right up until the last minute because all of these games are tight. Here's a
Hey,
broad.
this one wasn't bad.
Yes,
I didn't even realize it was the fourth quarter.
It was a 2-score victory, which I think is also
Decisive.
an important thing.
Yeah.
But when you look at why they're in so many of these close games, they don't have Eagles-Chiefs type of superior talent where they can just win a game 37-7. And that's not necessarily a knock. That's just a fact. And I think ultimately when you look at it, they're in these close games. So what are you going to do when it matters most? And while I've been somewhat critical of Desmond Ridder before and after his return to the starting lineup, the dude shows up in big moments. And I think that that's what they need from Jessie Bates, from Desmond Ridder, from the offensive and defensive lines. Can you show up in big moments? That's going to be key because these things are going to come down to the wire, how they perform. They need to perform better than they have, especially recently, because as Kate Nella said, they expected to win every game. You look at all of those games defensively, they gave up 2. Anyway, I could ramble on forever, but let's not do that and go home. So for Scott, Tori, and Terrin, I'm Scott. For Tori and Terrin. I totally botched that one. Anyway, thank you for listening to the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network. And we will talk to you again after a road game against the New York Jets. See ya.